Hello everyone and welcome. My name is Yanni here at Speed by Y. Today we're going to be doing a manual swap on this automatic 97M edition. I'm going to do a step-by-step tutorial of everything that you need to do in order to complete the swap. So, step 1 is going to be jacking up your car. Alright, once you have the car in the air, give it a shake. To do this swap, you're going to need a couple items. You're going to need a manual PPF, a manual set of gas brake clutch pedals, clutch master cylinder, clutch slave cylinder, a clutch line, the extended braided ones work best, manual clutch and flywheel, manual flywheel bolts, and some time.
First things first, after kind of looking under here, the exhaust needs to come off, for sure. The PPFs are different. The drive shafts are the same on 1.8 cars, so that's a win. And then you have some transcooler lines, which are up in there that need to come off. But first things first, we will start with the exhaust. Actually, we will start with disconnecting the battery. Always disconnect the battery first. Because we're going to have to remove a lot of grounds and the PPF, which has all of the wiring attached to it. So I'm going to do that. Spray down these bolts with PB Blaster, because they are not terrible. So hopefully they don't fight me. But, you know, I'm sure I'll eat my words later. I've been fighting with some rusty bolts. But regardless, we're now going to fight with some exhaust hangers. It really is helpful to spray them down with some WD-40. It will make your life way easier. Just go here and here. Try not to get WD-40 in your mouth. That's never fun. But you can see, I mean, there's crusties everywhere on this thing. So I will be in for a fun time for sure. They do make some special like pliers to get exhaust hangers off, which I might have to get some of those. It's also really important to wear protective eyewear when you're working under a car, because you do not want to slice something in your eye. That would be an absolutely horrible time.
A few moments later.
Alright, remove the exhaust. The two nuts definitely cause some havoc, so a tap and die set is really advantageous. We'll clean those threads up on reassembly. So next step, once you remove the exhaust, is get back under the car, remove the drive shaft, and the wiring.
Alright, we got the downpipe, as Mazda calls it, off. That was not fun, but swivels are your friend. Now, we can get back under here and do drive shaft. Once the drive shaft comes out, we can undo our PPF, power plant frame. We'll take the wiring off, and then we can start disassembling the transmission. That's going to require us removing the torque converter, which is up there, or the torque converter from the flex plate. So that will be an interesting proposition when we get there.
Now we're going to remove all the wiring clips from the PPF. Alright, so what you're seeing here is me using a pair of long-handled needle nose pliers to pinch the white tabs and kind of push out on the wiring. There's a bunch of those little clips that run all along the length of the PPF. You need to remove those. Once you do that, kind of push the wiring off to the side, and then you can get at the 14mm nuts and bolts for the drive shaft. Alright, what we're illustrating here, I didn't do a great job of filming this. There's a access plate on the bottom of the transmission. It's two 10mm bolts that you need to remove to get access to the flex plate, and that's what we're removing here. Pull that cover off, and then we'll get access to the flex plate.
Alright, so got the exhaust off, went ahead and uncoupled a lot of our electrical connections here. Then the torque converter needs to be taken off of the torque plate. There's an access cover right here that you can remove. Once you do that, you have to kind of rotate the flywheel around. I used a pry bar, or the flex plate, excuse me, not the flywheel. And then you can get that out. Once you get those out, you're good to disconnect the bolts that hold the trans onto the engine. Disconnect the PPF bolts. the two right here, and then there's two back at the differential that you can either take out and completely remove the PPF, which you will need to do because this is an automatic and they're different. On manual cars, you can kind of loosen those and scoot the PPF out of the way and drop everything out of the way. It's really just easier to take it out entirely, but I will let you make that decision.
So what worked best for me here is a 14mm ratcheting wrench and a pry bar to kind of hold the flex plate in place while you break those nuts loose, and then you can use the pry bar to kind of rotate the flex plate around. Definitely take your time here. You're going to have to use some kind of wrench. Ratcheting wrenches will definitely save you a ton of time here. But get all those removed, and then we'll be ready for the next step.
Alright, so I certainly had to fight with it for a little longer than I wanted to get the trans bolts out. When you get them all out, the trans is coming down, right? Then you have to disconnect all these miscellaneous connectors, and then the power harness from the battery is mounted to the trans in a couple spots. A couple wiring grommets that you got to undo. I'm in the process of getting those out. This guy right there, I can get you up to it. That guy all the way up in the right hand corner, that was kind of a nightmare because that was causing all kinds of stuff. So we'll get that out, and then we can drop the trans all the way out. It's going to puke trans fluid everywhere if you don't drain it, so make sure you have a pan handy because trans fluid is absolutely disgusting. Alright, so finally got it out. Naturally, automatic Miatas are an abomination. Swap all of them to manuals. Next, we will be putting everything back in, so that way we can convert it to manual. Alright, so this is your view after you remove the automatic transmission. That is a flex plate, which essentially kind of acts like a flywheel, but it bolts the torque converter. So we need to remove the flex plate. It is 6 19mm bolts. Those will come out. We can reuse those. Actually, you know what? We're not going to reuse those. We have manual ones that we can use. Those have a weird stamp on them, so I'm not super familiar about that. Install flywheel. Put blue Loctite on the flywheel bolts as they go in, and then we will put the clutch assembly on. I'll show you how to do that. And then the transmission goes back on. Install that, and we're sailing. So let me grab some tools, and we'll continue.
Alright, now we need to remove the 19mm bolts that hold the flex plate to the crankshaft. Should be 6 of them. I definitely recommend an impact for doing this. If you don't have one, you're going to have to find a way to hold the flex plate to keep it from turning on you. You could use a pry bar. Some people use a bolt and then a pry bar against the bolt. Now is definitely a good time to change your rear main seal. They're very cheap and you're already there. So go ahead and take those bolts out, and then we'll remove the flex plate and then get ready to install the clutch. Alright, so we talked about earlier not using automatic flywheel bolts. You definitely should not. As you can see, the automatic was stamped with an A and the manual is not. It has no markings. It also has a much larger shoulder on it. The automatic one does not have any, and it's also longer. Do not use automatic flex plate bolts on your manual transmission flywheel. They will shear off. You will then throw your flywheel into your bell housing, and you will have a very bad day. You need manual bolts. Alright, as you can see, we are now installing the flywheel. This is a standard weight 1.8 flywheel. It's always a good time to go ahead and change that pilot bearing since you have it out. The flywheel bolts need to have blue Loctite on them. Go ahead and insert them. It helps to put them in one by one, kind of get them threaded in, and then you can snug them the rest of the way down. You need to tighten these in a star pattern, and be careful not to over tight them. I'm snugging them down with an impact and then going back over on a final pass and making sure they're torqued to spec, which is, you know, a couple ugga-duggas. Just kidding, correct torque spec is between 71 and 75 foot-pounds according to Mazda. So go make sure you torque it to spec and you'll be good to go. Alright, so here we have our clutch. This is a Super Miata 4-puck. You're going to use the clutch alignment tool to insert it into the pilot bearing. Make sure it's centered the best that you can. Then you're going to put your pressure plate back on top, line up the dowel pins. Just note this is a sprung type clutch. Miata transmissions really get unhappy with unsprung clutches, so always use a sprung type clutch. Be careful where you source them. Sometimes they have icky materials and that's not good for you. The pressure plate bolts have lock washers, no Loctite needed. Go ahead and insert those. You're going to tighten them in a star pattern as well. I like to use an impact on a super low setting to kind of snug them down. Make sure the clutch is centered with the alignment tool while you do this. And then I'll go back through and do a final pass. The flywheel pressure plates, depending on your manufacturer, will have different torque specifications, but this one is 14 to 19 foot-pounds. So you can see they're tightening them in a star pattern. And then once that is finished, I'm upping the torque right there, cinching them down a little more. And once you have this tightened down, the clutch alignment tool should still glide in and out effortlessly. If it doesn't, you may need to loosen it up and then make sure it's centered. See, just like that, in and out easily. Next, we can install the transmission.
All right, so before we can put the transmission in, we have to make a room for it. So we have to remove the automatic transmission selector here, this junk. Oh, we locked it. So to do that, center console is to come out. Really easy. 2 screws in here, here. 1 screw under the ashtray. And don't know what all this is. This should just kind of lift out. If this didn't have all this wiring in it, it would come out. There we go. Another screw in there, and then 1 screw here, and then 1 more on the other side. So we'll take those out real quick.
Alright, so we are now removing all the small Phillips head screws that hold the center console down. Really helps to have an impact, but a regular Phillips head works just fine. Take your time, don't scratch any of your interior pieces. You'll be really upset with yourself for doing so. Center console pulls up from the front and then slides towards the front of the tombstone, and then you can pull it out. You need to remove the ashtray light and the window switch. This one was covered in all kinds of sugar. It was really hard to remove. I ended up just draping the console over to the side. The shifter mechanism is held in by 4 10mm bolts. You can just remove those. And then it also has some wiring attached to it that gave me a little bit of trouble. Manual cars also have the boot that's held on with the 4 bolts, but these automatics have a bunch of wiring and other grommets you need to remove.
12 seconds later.
So that is out. Some wires you have to disconnect, but no big deal. And then now we can get the transmission up into place.
Moments later.
Alright, it's really handy to use a jack to get the transmission up into place. It's also really handy to use a secondary jack on the front of the engine to tilt it toward the rear. It makes the transmission slide on a lot easier. You really can hurt yourself if you're not careful. You know, be careful when you're trying to hoist the transmission up in there. It really helps to also snag 1 or 2 bolts in if you can get them. That'll kind of allow you to slide the jack back towards the rear of the transmission and kind of wiggle it around a little bit to help it get into place. As always, take your time and be careful. The transmission will snap into place, and then it'll be good to tighten the rest of the bolts up.
Eventually.
Alright, so the transmission is installed. Slide the PPF on, 2 PPF bolts. The transmission speed sensor needs to go in as well. 2 bolts at the rear at the differential. Next, we need to install the drive shaft and swap the pedals. Alright, drive shaft just slides into the back of the transmission. The 14mm bolts go in with the lock washer against the nut. It's really helpful to use an impact here, otherwise you can put 2 on, pull the e-brake, tighten them, release the e-brake, spin the drive shaft around. It's easier with the impact. You can just kind of zip them on. Make sure you tighten these. You really don't want to have these come loose on you. And as always, nut and bolt check everything you do on your car after you've driven it a little while. Alright, use this opportunity to clean up the PPF ground. It's a 10mm bolt. It attaches right to the side of the PPF. Once you're finished with that, go ahead and snap the wiring harness back into the side of the PPF.
The next morning.
Alright, so I didn't end up filming pulling the pedals out. I should have. I'll walk you through what you have to do. It's a little easier to show you outside of the car now than underneath the column. So there are a bunch of bolts. You have 4 for the booster, which are here, here, there, and there. You then have one down here by the throttle pedal, and then a tricky guy is up here behind the main relay. It's a bolt that has to come out. Once you get those out, you need to disconnect the cables for the throttle there and there. It helps to just use the needle nose pliers and kind of wiggle it out. Pops right out. Then you need to drop the steering column down. 2 bolts here and here. They mount there and there. Disconnect some wiring so that way you can drop the column down lower. And then you have to wiggle the poop out of these pedals. It kind of helped for me to turn them and then get them out. In reality, if I did it again, I would probably just drop the steering column. Sometimes the little connector or the U-joint on the steering rack can be quite a pain in the butt to get back on, so I opted not to do that this time. But if I was doing this again, I would definitely recommend do that. Now we are going to remove some of this mat back here, so that way we can take out the plate that blocks the clutch master cylinder. And then we will put the new pedals back in and be... Alright, so you have to remove, I think this is the automatic transmission computer. It's on a stud back here, and then you can kind of see that is the little plate that we need to remove. 2 12 millimeters, and then that little plastic piece with 2 little tangs that will pinch with a flathead, or excuse me, some needle nose, and get that off, and then that plate will come off and we can install the clutch master cylinder.
So the best way to really get the new pedals back in, I saw, is to kind of slide them over the steering column, assuming you haven't removed it, and then kind of twist them back into place and get them up into position. It certainly takes a little finagling. You're going to get caught up on the harness underneath. Just take your time, be careful, don't get, too frustrated. Everything will kind of slowly slip into place. And then once you do that, you can put the brake booster back onto the studs and start tightening all the pedals back down.
Later.
Alright, so the pedals have been installed now. I'm at the front of the car inserting the brake booster back into the pedal assembly. You can also go ahead and pop on the clutch master cylinder as well. So once you do that, now I am tightening the bolts that hold the brake booster to the brake pedal, tighten the pedal assembly to the firewall. There's 2 little clips for the throttle cable that need to go back into the throttle pedal. There's also a pin that holds the brake booster to the brake pedal. Insert that along with the cotter pin. You need to then reconnect all the wiring that you have disconnected and try to avoid pressing on the clutch pedal until you hook up the clutch line. Otherwise, you'll spray brake fluid all over the engine bay. Once that's done, you can go ahead and start reassembling the exhaust. I already installed the clutch slave. 3 of these nuts need to go back on. They're 14 millimeter. They usually strip. I'm actually about to have a problem with that, and we're going to have to remove the exhaust manifold, but that is a whole separate ordeal. Usually this should not be a big issue for you. This one doesn't want to come on or off, so we will use my 1/2-inch drive, and then you can watch me snap this stud off in here and then turn it to...
NANI?
We got it.
Several bad puns later.
Alright, so it's a couple days later. The studs that I referred to that are in the manifold, there, and there, snapped off. So that involved me having to remove the header, put it on the bench, use vice grips, and just kind of slowly get them out, and then run a tap through to clean up the threads. So that's done now, so now we can finish reassembly of the exhaust and then continue with the rest of the swap. Alright, so all you really need to do, wiring-wise, is this black and brown wire under the car is a black with white and black with blue, these big ones. You need to jump those 2. I just disconnected them and put a butt connector on them, crimped it together. That's it, that's the neutral switch. Once you do that, the car is ready to go. So we should be good to go here. Let's take a look. 3 pedals now. Make sure you're in neutral because, we've jumped a neutral switch now. fantastic. And as we can see, he needs to get a boot. That takes a lot of like noise and wind away. It is manual, runs and drives great. So there you go. I hope this was helpful to some people who are also manual swapping their cars. As always, hit us up on Facebook, Speed by Y LLC, or our website, speedbyyllc.com, and we'll see you in the next one.